Professor Graham Edgar has been a tutor with the Open University for many years and is a current D2100 tutor, Vice Chair of OOPS and a regular contributor to OOPS Weekends. He is a Professor of Psychology and Applied Neuroscience at the University of Gloucestershire, where he works in the general area of cognitive psychology with particular interests in the areas of perception and situation awareness. Graham and his colleagues have developed novel methods of measuring situation awareness, and they are the first group to link situation awareness with the underpinning neuroscience. Current research includes studies of driver behaviour and working with fire services across Europe to develop tools for assessing and training firefighter situation awareness. Graham has spent a substantial amount of time applying psychology in the real world. He has written for undergraduates at all levels and was an author of the Perception and Attention chapter in D300 and the Perception chapter in DSE 212, and he's contributed to D100. We are delighted to welcome Graham this evening for this lecture. Where did it all go wrong? A career in human factors. Thanks, Graham.
Okay, thanks, Abby. And here we go. I'll just draw your attention to the trigger warning down the bottom here. We have some adult material in this lecture. I'll try and warn you when it's coming up. So if you want to look the other way, that's absolutely fine. Okay, this is a talk about human factors, and I'll try and give you some idea of what it is, what it's about, why psychology can lead you to human factors, and what you need to do if that's what you want to become. So, oops, hang on, let's just try this one. Okay. This is what we're talking about, really. There is a distinction in the area between human factors and ergonomics. Ergonomics tends to be sort of the more physical side, so is your chair the right height, that sort of thing. Human factors tends to be more the cognitive stuff, the actual psychology. So this is what we're dealing with, the human brain, in essence. And to give you some idea of what we are dealing with, let's have a look. It's got about 10 to the 11 neurons in your brain. And that is about 100 billion neurons. As Fred pointed out last time I did this talk, I had my billions and trillions mixed up, but I think I've got it right this time, so we'll have some errors somewhere else instead. Hello, I think we're picking up a taxi. Okay, so about 100 billion neurons, each one synapses about 7,000 other neurons, so phenomenally complex structure, and widely regarded as the most complex object in the known universe. It certainly is an impressive piece of kit. So given all of that, why does the human brain decide that it wants to do something like this? This is the sort of issue that you're dealing with as a human factors professional, the strange things that people decide they will do. And your job is to try and design systems that will either stop them doing it or allow them to do it if they want to. But you're trying to just make life better, really. When you come across good human factors, it tends to be quite obvious, although you tend not to notice it so much, because anything with good human factors, it's well designed, it works well, and you just use it, you just don't tend to notice. So there's a couple of examples of nice, I'll just get rid of this yellow, this little arrow, of good human factors. This is a map of Warsaw, Old Town in Poland, of course, and it's just a lovely thing. It's a lovely sort of little sculpture in its own right, but it also gives you a map of the old town, but it's 3D and it works equally well for sighted or non-sighted people. Just something that works really well and really simply. And it's got braille on the top there as well with directions and stuff. So just a really nice bit of human factors. A similar one, this is in Florence, this is the she-wolf sculpture with all the blurb in front of it. And if you look at the blurb from a different angle, it's got a braille overlay. So sighted people can read it and so can non-sighted people. I did wonder how the whole sculpture thing would work for somebody that couldn't see it, but that's another issue, really. Unfortunately, there are probably more examples of bad human factors than there are good, and I'll show you a few of those. First one, this is an obvious one. Most people have come across this, that impossible, really hard packaging that the only way you can get into is with scissors. So packing scissors that way, well, you get the idea. This is an interesting one. This is the information desk in Chopin Airport in Warsaw. That's one of the people. That's the other people. They seem to have made a slight error in the in the height of their information desk or their chairs. So you can certainly tell when things are not going so well. Okay. Okay, Batman. Usually a sort of really good example of good human factors. Batman is famous for all the gizmos and things, but not always. Got some clips here from the upcoming Batman movie. I did have a video, but unfortunately it doesn't work on Adobe Connect, so I'm afraid I have to make do with a few stills. But here they are. This is Batman in trouble, being attacked by a ferocious shark, which has managed to get itself wedged into the ladder by the looks of it. And Robin, of course, is in the Batcopter just overhead. Batman, in desperation, calls out for Robin, hand me down the shark repellent bat spray, obviously. And this is where you see the human factors really starts to go awry, because here is the array of bat sprays. Now, from a human factors point of view, you can see the problem. There's no redundant coding. They're not color-coded. They're not shaped. You can have them shaped like the fish you're supposed to be repelling, whatever. But they're all very similar. It's only the writing that's different, and that is an accident waiting to happen. In an emergency, when Batman's in trouble and you're reaching for the bat spray, you could easily get the wrong one. You'll be reassured to know, however, that Robin does reach for the right bat spray, and so I think all was well. Another example of bad human factors. I saw this in my local supermarket, and I was quite thrilled. I thought, fantastic, I'll get a couple of bottles of that and knock them back really quickly, and that should really help. And of course, when you look at it more closely, you realise that this is, in fact, of course, Syncon blocker. Well, I suppose it would shift the fat, but maybe not quite the way that you intended. So, again, bad human factors. The most prominent thing is the big sign, not what it actually does. So, bad human factors. Another example, which you see quite a lot, particularly in quite complicated systems, is this. Too many features. And you see how this happens. You start off with a simple bit of kit, and then somebody says, well, why don't we have a so-and-so on it? Why don't we have Wi-Fi? Why don't we have whatever? And before you know it, it's a bloated and completely unusable system. You can actually buy a penknife like this, I believe. I think it'd be a fantastic thing to own. Completely useless, but impressive. So does this happen in real life? Well, before we get to real life, let's have a look at Iron Man. Interesting system here. This is, for those you know, Iron Man, of course, he can fly around in his suit and he has all this high-tech stuff. And what I'm interested in here is this sort of stuff. He's got what we would call a helmet-mounted display. I used to work on these back in my day with British Aerospace, and very good and very simple idea. You basically project information onto a visor in front of the person, and they can see the information on the visor, and they can see the outside world at the same time. So you can keep looking where you're going and still get all the information. Inherently good idea. The trouble is, and the temptation with all these things is to put up too much information, because you can do it, the temptation is to do it. And I would say that Iron Man has rather overdone it here. He's got way too much information up there, because one of the things we know from psychology is you can only process so much information. So if you've got loads and loads of info, yeah, it's all there, but you can't make any sense of it. You say, well, does it ever happen in real life? Well, yes, it does. This is the helmet-mounted display for the latest fast jet, known as a Tempest now, I think. And I actually did some work on this when I was at Aerospace. I was working on the stereopsis side, trying to present images to the two eyes, which is not a trivial problem. But one of the bits of advice I gave them for free while I was doing that was say, well, whatever you do, don't put too much information up on the helmet-mounted display, because people won't be able to take it all in. What they need is the right information at the right time, not everything at once. Obviously, they didn't listen. I left before this ever came into service, but they actually lost the contract, I think, for the helmet, according to this article anyway, because they're saying there's so much information on being projected onto the visor that the pilots can't see where they're going, which you have to say is a bad thing when you're traveling at 1,000 miles per hour. So I was very tempted to get in touch with them, so I told you so, but that would just be churlish. Maybe. Okay. So, fundamentally, it's the human in human factors that makes it so challenging. It's the case that almost any system you can put together, humans will find some way of doing something stupid with it. And that is what you're trying to deal with as a human factors person. You're trying to understand the psychology, you're trying to understand what people will do, and trying to understand the rather weird mistakes they're likely to make. And some people have an inherent faith in the human factor. So, for example, here, another example. I've got a collection of these photos. I've been collecting them for years. But, faith in the human factor. This one, I must admit, gives me the heebie-jeebies. And while some people do have great faith in the human factors specialists don't. One of the things you soon come to realize when you work in this sort of area is how remarkably, there were very strange things that people can do. And what you find is that people can be plain stupid. They can do remarkably stupid things. You've got somebody here with the acetylene torch blasting the, the bottles of fuel. This is not a good idea. Another one here, having a fag with the flammable gas. And this one, well, I don't know what to say about it really. It's one of these what happens next type slides. You can't help feeling this is not going to go well. But one of the problems you have when you're designing systems and trying to get them so that they will work is that people can not only be stupid, but they can combine that stupidity with great ingenuity. The phenomenal human brain can do remarkably ingenious things and do bad things in a clever way. The next one I think has to be my favourite slide for doing something rather stupid but with tremendous ingenuity. I just rather like this one. Okay, so what's the job of the human factors person? It is to allow for human capabilities, so that systems, bits of kit, whatever, will work with what people can do, the basic cognitive capabilities that people have, but also to deal with that inherent stupidity and ingenuity that you are trying to work with. You're trying to stop people. Well, you're trying to make things easier to use. That's one of the things you're trying to do, and you're trying to stop people hurting themselves or others. So, what I'll do is talk through, sadly, a rather tragic case. This is quite a sad case, I'm afraid, but it does show the sort of issues that you're trying to deal with in human factors. So we'll have a look at this. This is an event that happened at Phelps Hospital in New York, and the person it concerns is Michael Colombini. He had a headache. He was collapsed. He was taken to the hospital. And they gave him scans, so MRI scans and so on, and found a lesion in the brain, basically a brain tumour, which they operated on and successfully operated on it. They gave Michael a follow-up MRI scan to see how it had gone, and one of the things about MRI scanners is that they generate tremendous magnetic fields. Take your watch into a scanner, that's the end of it. This is Mark Greenlee, who I did a project with, just out of interest. Psychologists are very concerned with ethics. I did a project here where I was in the scanner for about 2 hours. This isn't me, but I'm quite claustrophobic, so being shoved into the scanner I found incredibly uncomfortable. They gave me this panic button saying, don't worry, if you feel uncomfortable, and I was in there for about 2 hours, just press the button and we'll come get you out. What they didn't tell me was they forgot to connect it. So, talking of ethics, but hey, we got through all right. Anyway, big magnetic fields. That's an example. Show you some examples of these big magnetic fields. Just get out of the way. These are things that have been sucked into a scanner because of the basic whopping great magnets. So wheelchair, wash bucket, office chair, trolley, drip pole, gun. The gun was interesting. Apparently a police officer went into the MRI room and it drew it out of his holster, hit the side of the scanner, and it actually went off. Luckily nobody was hurt. Floor polisher. Bed and a horse. Okay, I'm only kidding about the horse. I just love the idea the horse was wandering past and having to catch the horseshoes. I think they're actually scanning it, of course. Okay, so going back to the case, Michael was sedated for the scan. It was after the operation, and he needed oxygen. and that was being provided by 2 cylinders that were strapped to the wall of a computer room that was driving the scanner. The cylinder should have been changed, but it hadn't been, and it ran low, and the oxygen actually ran out. So the anaesthesiologist rapped on the window and called out for more oxygen. He couldn't leave the room. I think it was a he, because couldn't leave the room, and he was managing the anaesthetic, and there was no microphone or phone or anything to get anything else. So the tanks would need to be swapped over, and the staff were struggling to do it. A passing nurse heard the call for oxygen, picked up a 20-pound oxygen canister from the other side of the hallway from outside the MRI room, and brought it into the MRI room. The nurse passed the event horizon, which is basically where the pull of the scanner was greater than the weight of the cylinder. The cylinder shot into the scanner and hit Michael in the skull. After initiating brain death protocol, Michael was pronounced dead 2 days later. Okay, so this is the sort of thing that in some ways you feel you can contribute to. Yeah, I was not involved in this incident, I hasten to add. I'm just looking in from the outside. But one of the things that an investigation will often do is look at how did it happen. And that's very easy to work out. So in this case, how did it happen? The nurse picked up the cylinder, carried it in the MRI room, and that precipitated the accident. That's what happened. And we call that the active error, because you can see the link between the action of the person and the actual incident. So there's a really clear link. That's the active error, the final error that precipitates the accident. But in some ways, the how question is the easy one. What you really want to know is why did it happen? That's where you can actually look and see, okay, why did this happen? And more importantly, what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? So in that case, you're starting to look much more carefully and further back in the process. What you're often looking for is not the active error, which is often quite obvious, but the latent errors that set up the conditions that would allow that to happen. They are often hidden away. They can be the culture of the company. They can be mistakes that have been made years ago. But they sit there, and then they allow the incident to progress and to actually happen. So let's have a look at some of the earlier errors. The canister wasn't swapped earlier. If it had have been, there would have been no problem. There were steel canisters within reach of the MRI room. If they'd been, none within any sort of distance, they couldn't have been carried in there. No microphone in the MRI room. If there had have been, the anaesthesiologist could have called out or could have called for help over the microphone. There would have been no confusion, and the incident wouldn't have happened. Open access to the MRI room. A lock on the door would have stopped this accident. And finally, the nurse carries the steel canister into the MRI room. So these first few, really, if you like, are the latent errors, and the last one is the active error that actually precipitates the problem. Just out of interest, there was one horrendous latent error, which wasn't really involved in this case, but it's this last one. There were also steel fire extinguishers in the MRI room. So they actually had steel fire extinguishers strapped to the wall of the MRI room. So in the event of a fire, if the fire hadn't got the person in the scanner, the fire extinguisher probably would. So that's a really horrendous error tucked away in the background there. So who was to blame? In this case, this is unusual. The hospital took full responsibility, just said, okay, we will take responsibility. We'll work out what went wrong. We'll look at the why questions, and we will get better procedures. And this is exactly what they did. So rather than just saying it's the nurse's fault for carrying the oxygen in there, they actually looked at the whole chain, and it made for much better processes. So have a look at some of the sort of human factors-y type theory in the background, really. And this is a really nice model. It's my favourite because it involves cheese, for looking at how these incidents occur. And this is James Reason's. It's called the Swiss cheese model. You can see why. And the idea is you have all these slices of cheese, and each one, if you like, is a possible block to an accident happening, like locking the door of the MRI room, whatever. But each of the holes in your Swiss cheese is a way in which a mistake can happen and the error can be propagated through to become an accident. If the holes all line up, like here, then the sort of error propagates through the system and you get the accident at the end of it. If you can block off any of these slices, block any of these holes, then you can stop the accident. And it's a really nice little model, really, of how it all works. And just as an illustration, don't try and read this slide, it's just sort of screw your eyes up and say, what the heck thing. But this is looking at what's called the error chain. It's another version of the Swiss cheese model. The idea that any accident doesn't usually happen from one incident. It's a series of errors that propagate through, like through the Swiss cheese, and you get the accident. So these are the error chains, or the slices in the Swiss cheese, whatever you like to call them, that led up to the Michael Colombini accident. And if you look at the sort of boxes, a lot of them are what you could call if-only boxes. If only this had been changed, if only this had been done, if only this had happened, you wouldn't have got that particular error. And yeah, if you have any experience, and you hope not really, but if you've ever had an accident, like a bump in a car or whatever, afterwards you tend to think, oh, if only I hadn't done that, if only we hadn't gone there, if only this hadn't happened. And that is the error chain leading up to the accident. Most accidents are a series of sort of unfortunate incidents, really, that lead to the final accident. And one of the jobs of a human factors person is to try and break that error chain. Try and put in checks and balances, try and stop that error chain happening. Okay. So, human factors. Two jobs, really, summed up in one rather nice phrase. This is from Eric Holnagel. Human error is best understood as a judgment made in hindsight. Isn't that true? It's always easy to see where things went wrong afterwards. And so, two jobs. One is to analyse incidents without hindsight, and like the ones I've been talking about, to look back and say, well, knowing what we know about human capabilities, is it reasonable to expect somebody in those circumstances to have been able to avoid the accident? And that's one of the jobs of a human factors person. And often you can get involved in accident investigation and so on, looking at what's happened after an incident. The other one is to provide the hindsight in advance, and this is to be actually involved in the design process and say, okay, let's look at things as they're being designed, like the Boeing, like anything else, and if you like, to foresee problems, knowing what you know about humans, try and work out where the problems might be and counter them before. So, you fill in the holes in the Swiss cheese, take out the latent errors, break the error chain. That's what you're trying to do. I'll give an example of this, which I think it's almost legendary in human factors. Now, this is the sexual content, so if you're uncomfortable with that, look away now, and I'll tell you when to look back. But it's summed up by this particular paper. I'll give you a second to read that. Okay, these particular injuries resulted from one particular piece of kit. Particularly, not just, there's quite a few papers like this out there, but I'm going to put up a picture of the piece of kit and also an excerpt from the paper, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to read this. Here we go. I would put money on the fact that whoever designed this piece of kit did not anticipate that this was the way it was going to be used. So you could say that's a human factors failing, and in some ways, as a human factors person, you are looking to try and look for these odd bits of behaviour. Just out of interest, this is of course also the same company that was involved in the free flights debacle, so not very good on the human factors. But that is what human factors is, trying to foresee the errors before they actually occur. Okay, if you were looking away, feel free to look back. Look back now. Okay. So if any of that you think, well, this is good fun, I would like to to become a human factors person, then I see someone's raised their hand, but if you want to hold questions and stuff till the end, then please do. There'll be time to come back and chat about those at the end. So if you want to get into human factors, here are some of the sort of key organisations, if you like. For the UK, it's the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. That's a professional body. In America, it's the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, and everywhere else, it's the Applied Ergonomics Society. So I'm not a member of any of them actually, because you have to pay for it, and I'm a member of enough societies as it is. But they're a good start, particularly the CIEHF if you want to get any details about human factors and so on in the UK. If you fancy doing qualifications, these are places that do them. I'm afraid the website's a bit of a horrible long one, but if you go to the CIEHF website, you can find all the details there. Most human factors courses tend to be postgrad, MScs. This is because you tend to need a really good broad knowledge of psychology in human factors. That tends to be the basis of it. So the best thing to do is to do the psychology degree, get your BPS accreditation, all that sort of stuff, and then do the human factors training afterwards. So get all those through the CIEHF website. Companies that employ human factors people, well, all the big players. So Kinetic, that used to be part of the MOD, but it's now a big private consultancy. DSTL, which is the still part of the MOD, it's their research arm, if you like. And the big players like BAE Systems, Thales, Boeing, and I presume places like Dyson, especially given the last example that I showed you. Also, small consultancies will often have human factors people, but yeah, there's all sorts of jobs out there really for human factors type people. And if you want to look at the sort of issues in human factors, I've just put up this website for a really nice blog. My friend Martin Langham been doing human factors for many years. He did the human factors for the Princess Diana crash in the tunnel in Paris. But very nice blog on the issues and what it is to do human factors and all that sort of stuff. So that's well worth a look. Okay, I've talked sort of about general things and just stuff sort of in the big incidents in the news. I thought I'd spend the last little bit just having a look at my career, and here we go. For some reason, toilets seem to feature more than I would have expected in my career. But let's have a talk about those for a minute. Here's me in a ladies' lavatory in North Wales. There was no need to call the police because this was actually in a police station. The reason I'm in there is because I was trying to do some measurements for some emergency lighting, and I needed to get a certain distance. And the only way I could do it was just get that extra metre or two, was to open the door and take the reading from in there. But another job I had in my BAE days was this one. This is the Nimrod maritime surveillance aircraft. It was an interesting project. This was a new maritime surveillance aircraft, and for political reasons, which I won't go into now, they won the contract with a bid to refit a 30-year-old airframe, which was interesting. But anyway, I was brought in to do what's called the lighting philosophy. And this just means doing all the lighting throughout the aircraft. So I did everything. I did the cockpit here. I did the mission area, which is where the radar and things go. I did the galley, which is where they go for their cup of tea and stuff. I did the ordnance area, which is where they do dropping things on submarines and dropping sonar buoys for detecting things. And I even did the bomb bay. I did all of that. It was a significant piece of work. It had to be cross-referenced with standards, all sorts of things. So this was quite a big piece of work. I was rather dismayed that having done all that, just before it was due to go into service, the first ones were flying, the system was done, it was ready to go. Again, I think for political reasons, it was cancelled and scrapped. I don't think it was a lighting philosophy, although maybe the chandeliers were a step too far, but unfortunately it was scrapped. So all that work, well, that's life really. But just out of interest, this is one of the problems I had. As I did the lighting for all of the areas, mission area, ordnance area, cockpit, everything. Only one bit did I have trouble with. Only one bit that the RAF weren't happy with, and that was the toilet. Why was it the toilet? Well, one of the things the Nimrod does, yes, it looks for submarines and stuff, but it also does a lot of, did a lot of air-sea rescue work. And to do that, it has a lookout area where somebody can just stand basically and look out and try and see survivors in the water, that sort of thing. And it was often doing this at night. And of course, the thing about looking out at night is you want to be used to the dark. You want to dark adapt, which we know from psychology that people dark adapt, and we know how long it takes. It takes about 20 minutes for the eye to fully dark adapt, and then you're most sensitive and most likely to see things in the water. So that's 20 minutes. The problem is, with the way the Nimrod was laid out, was that the toilet was in the lookout area. So somebody spent 20 minutes dark adapting, somebody goes to the loo, puts the light on, that's it. The dark adaptation's gone for another 20 minutes. So I had to try and come up with some solution to try and stop this happening, human factors. So I came up with what I thought was a really neat idea. It'd be like a fridge in reverse. So you open the door of the toilet, the light goes off, you go in and close the door, the light comes on. And I thought that was a great idea, but the RAF would not accept it. I won't say why they won't accept it. They had a good reason, which I only found out talking to them in the pub. But anyway, they wouldn't accept it. So in the end, I had to go for sort of low-level lighting, which was a bit of a compromise. But in terms of human factors, if only I'd known about one system, it could have solved all of those problems. I regard this as one of the best examples of human factors I've ever seen. And here it is. This is the LavNav. Fantastic human factors. So let's have a look at how it works. Very nice system. Basically, you stick it on the underside of the toilet seat, like here, and it has a motion sensor in it. So most of the time it's not on, but if somebody wanders in there in the middle of the night, it picks up the motion and it switches the light on. So you don't have to dazzle yourself with a bathroom light, which is nice. You've got this low-level light. What's brilliant about it is it also detects whether the loo seat is up or down. If the loo seat's down, it shines green light. And if the loo seat is up, it shines a red light. And this, I think, is the really key, brilliant human factors bit. If it shines a red light when the seat is up, it also shines a target into the toilet bowl for to aim at, basically. You think, well, now, isn't that great human factors? Come back to the lab now. Oh, you can still get them, by the way. They became the loo light for a bit, but now they've got this rather weird name. But you can still get them on Amazon, and they only cost about £5. I'm not on commission or anything, but what a fantastic piece of kit. I do have one. I don't use it. I do have one. Okay, no talk about toilets is possibly complete without talk about the Schiphol fly. This is, again, almost legendary. This is the problem that people who use urinals have a tendency to miss, and it makes a horrible mess. Well, this wasn't actually the first place they were used, but it's the one that's best known. One great name as well. Oversaw the introduction of an idea that was devised by the cleaning manager, which was to etch a little fly just near the plug hole, basically, on the urinal. And what happens is it gives people something to aim for. And people don't like flies, so they're happy to aim for it. And found they got about an 80% reduction in spillage and about an 8% reduction in bathroom cleaning costs, which is impressive for just one little fly. And this is effectively a nudge. Richard Thaler, winner of the 2017 Nobel Prize for nudge theory, he referred to it as his favourite illustration of a nudge. And a nudge is really good human factors. What it is, you're nudging people to do what they want to do anyway. So you're just encouraging the behaviour they would naturally do, and that's a nudge. So this is a nudge, and it's just a really nice example. Problem is, it doesn't seem to keep working because I think, again, this is classic standard psychology. I think people habituate. You have a go at the fly a few times and you get bored, and you don't don't do it again. So I thought I'd just finish this lecture by a bit of human factors in action to think about how we could deal with that problem. You've got the problem that people like something to aim at when they're going to the loo, but they get bored, and so they stop using it. So the fly works for a while, but then maybe it doesn't work for much longer. So here's my idea, and remember, you heard it here first. This is to modify the LavNav. So the LavNav just shines a simple target onto the toilet bowl or urinal, whatever, gives you something to aim for. Well, my thinking is maybe rather than just a target that stays the same, you could have something you don't like the fly, to aim for. And this can be anything. I've got the virus in there just because I don't like it at the moment. But also I thought, well, what you could do is connect this up to a mobile phone app, and then you could just have whatever you like in the toilet bowl. So anything you don't like, you could put in there, and you could change it each time you go. And I don't know about you, but with my list, I would never need to use the same picture twice, and you'd always have something new to amuse yourself. And that, I think, solves the problem. That's human factors. And when every toilet in the world has got one of these, just remember that you heard it here first. Okay, so I think that's enough about toilets. But one of the things trying to get across with the whole toilet thing is that any system where you have an interaction between a human and a system, there will be some human factors going on there. Everything from secateurs to space rockets, there will be human factors if a human is interacting with some sort of system. And that's why that human factors really is a job for life. But more than that, it is a job for life. You are trying to either save lives or look to prevent accidents happening in the future. And that is the end of the talk. Thank you very much for your time.